Hello Internet, welcome back to our journey through the Universal Classic Monster series. We're moving now into pure sequel territory with 1936 Dracula's Daughter and 1943's Son of Dracula. I think it's fair to say that Dracula's Daughter had a tough act to follow, 1931's Dracula starring Bela Lugosi. This movie picks up directly where Dracula ends up on. So Dracula's got a stake through his heart and Van Helsing is arrested for murder. I understand the original concept for the movie was to have a prologue with Bela Lugosi and Gloria Holden, with Bela as the human Dracula, explaining how he became a vampire. Then we jump 400 years or so to the present and kick off. Whilst that sounds tantalising and fascinating to a horror fan, and I would have loved seeing what Lugosi would have done with that. The simple fact of the matter is that those 10 or 15 minutes at the start of the movie would have hit. There's no two ways about it. He would have completely overshadowed the rest of the movie. You would have spent the entire time wondering, when's Bela coming back? When's Dracula coming back? So much money has been sunk into this that by the time it comes to the screen, there's no time and money left to light this in with the luscious shadows and the darks and the lights and the sets that we come to expect from Dracula, from Frankenstein, from Bride of Frankenstein. If this story had been slotted into the luscious environments that we have seen to date, I think it would have stuck in a lot more people's minds. As it is, it seems flat. It almost seems sort of made for TV. But if you dig a little deeper beneath the surface, there's some amazing content in this movie. This is almost an 80-year-old movie, and there's stuff in here that I don't really recall seeing ever again. Let me know. But to have the hero of the first movie end the movie by staking the vampire, and then the second movie picks straight up with him being arrested for murder, and almost having to prove the existence of vampires to get himself off, either that or to assert that he's insane and cop an insanity plea. That's a superb thing to play with. The other thing that still seems fresh now, although many more people have picked up this thread and run with it, is the idea of the self-loathing vampire. Gloria Holden plays Countess Valeska, I think I remember her name being, apologies if that's wrong, who self-identifies as Dracula's daughter. And she comes to London, A, to convince herself that Dracula's dead, and B, to steal and burn his body to ensure that the hold he has over her is broken. The Countess becomes convinced that through psychoanalysis, she can be cured of her vampirism, of her unnatural impulses. Now, this idea of a self-loathing vampire it screams Anne Rice. It screams Interview with a Vampire. So in 1976, Interview with a Vampire was published, so 40 years later, and the Countess in Dracula's Daughter is definitely a progenitor, I feel, of Louis from Interview with a Vampire. This film plays almost like a battle of the sexes in a way. So Dr. Garth, who the Countess fixates on, has a secretary called Janet. And Garth's relationship with Janet is very much a sort of proto Hepburn and Tracy type. They're fighting all the time because they're really attracted to one another kind of thing. But in this movie, it doesn't come off. One of the weakest links in the chain of this movie is Otto Kruger, who plays Dr. Garth. I don't buy him as a leading man. I don't buy him as a guy that these women would fight over. And he comes across as a bit of a prick, actually, and he treats women really badly. He seems to have a complete and utter disdain for the women in his life. So what works with the sparky relationships between Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy just comes across as really off in this. That relationship has its dark shadow with the Countess and her sort of human manservant, Semper. And their battle of wills is much, much more interesting. The dynamic there, at first you sort of naturally assume that the vampire is in control and the human servant who moves around by day and does all of their bidding is the subservient one. But Semper really psychologically and emotionally dominates this fragile vampire mistress. She wants a cure and he doesn't want her to be cured. You get the feeling that he doesn't want her to be with Dr. Garth. You learn later on that she's promised him immortality, but you get the flavour that there's more to it than that. And one of the juicier scenes running through this movie are all the power plays people are making. Janet tries to undermine the Countess with her burgeoning relationship with Dr. Garth. Dr. Garth tries to dominate Janet, but finds that he's sort of all at sixes and sevens without her to organise his life. The Countess plays up to the Doctor's idea of himself as a brilliant mind, and she comes across to him as a subservient, retiring woman who needs the strong Doctor to save her. But when that plan doesn't quite come to fruition, the places flip and she becomes the dominant monster that's going to impose immortality on him. You will be with me one way or another. Meanwhile, you've got Semper in the background trying to hinder her, I feel, genuine attempts to cure herself because it serves him better to have her in this tortured position of a vampire. Now, whether she's actually a vampire or not, this is a game you can play with the movie. It frustrates some people. It absolutely fascinates me. And I think there's a tie between this and a movie I've mentioned previously, George Romero's Martin, where it never answers the question, is this a vampire we're dealing with or someone who's psychologically damaged and has fixated on the notion that they are a vampire? Honestly, it deserves to be remembered higher up amongst the canon of Universal classic monster movies. It's a movie that's ripe for remaking because the themes of the gender wars and just the battle of wits and wills around this central character who may be a vampire or is certainly at the very least emotionally damaged. We're missing out the biggest power play of all, really. She's convinced, even after death, even from beyond the grave, that the will of her father, of Dracula, is forcing her to do these things. The psychology and the different psychologies that run through this movie are so, they're much more nuanced and interesting and intricate than the Renfield psychopathy of the first movie. There's depths to this that you just want to plumb and plumb and plumb, and you kind of wish that they managed to pull off the tone and the feel and the look with as much polish as they brought to the table with previous movies. If they had managed that, this would have been a dyed-in-the-wool classic, and people will be talking about it still. As it is, it's there, ready and waiting for you to discover and enjoy. Son of Dracula is weaker. It's a lot weaker. There's an argument to be made that it was called Son of Dracula off the back as an echo to Son of Frankenstein, which had come out previously. There's an amazing argument to be made that this should really be called Bride of Dracula. The film is not about Dracula. It is about Dracula's bride. He does get married in this. And this is really a movie of two halves. And the half that works, I wish they'd made it all about that and not about the half that doesn't work. This is as close as you're going to get, I think, to a Universal monster movie in the film noir mold. This is the double indemnity of the Universal monster movies. If you haven't seen it, don't watch the rest of this. Check it out and come back and watch this, because what's at play here is a superb double bluff, a long con, if you like. There are two sisters whose father dies at the hands of Count Dracula at the start of the movie, and they inherit his estate and his wealth, and it's split. between the good blonde daughter and the kooky, morbid, occult-obsessed, dark-haired, bad daughter. And her plan is an absolute fucking doozy. She's a classic femme fatale, but she really pushes it to the extreme. She's had it in her head forever that she's going to marry this guy that they've known each other since childhood, and he's got it in his head that he's going to help her run the plantation when she inherits it from her father. There are all of these comments towards the start of the movie about how a woman can't run the plantation on her own. Oh, you don't need to worry about that. You know, she'll be married to me. And how she's got all of these. She's gone abroad and she's come back with all of these strange occult notions that people dismiss as, you know, the workings of an excitable female mind. Her fiance even says, we'll take a long honeymoon, 6 months, a year, if it takes that long to get these notions out of your head. He thinks that this is a passing fad. What she's actually discovered in her travels is that vampirism is real and she can achieve immortality through Count Dracula. She puts in place a plan to invite Dracula to America, where Dracula will kill her father so she can inherit the plantation. She'll marry Dracula. Dracula will make her a vampire. She will then double-cross Dracula, make her fiancé a vampire, but before she does that, whilst he can still move about in the daylight, he has to kill Dracula for her. That sounds fucking amazing. The real problem with that is that the majority of the film's running time is spent with the sort of local constabulary running around having expositional conversation, literally talking to people, conveying the content of conversations we've just seen them having with other people, running around. And the utter waste of this is, if you ever watch the film again, they do absolutely nothing to influence the plot or the outcome. You could literally lift the bulk of this cheap stuff to film, people talking in rooms, out of the plot, and the outcome would still be eventually the same. Kay, the Dark Sister, is a fascinating character who decides to play Dracula, completely cons Dracula. And again, this is something that we've never seen before. It's just in the execution, unfortunately, is so lacking. But sprinkled amongst this sort of film noir bluff, double bluff con of a movie are some, for the time, must have been amazing special effects. This is the first vampire movie, I believe I'm correct in saying, where you see on screen the transformation from bat into human form vampire. Amazing scene where Kay visits her fiance, who's been locked up in a jail cell for killing her, and everyone's seen her corpse and no one knows she's a vampire, and she appears in his jail cell and lets him in on her plan, and then she has to go and overpower the guard, and she just morphs into smoke, and then the smoke passes through the bars of the jail cell and then drifts off towards the door. And I get a kick out of that now, so audiences at the time must have gone nuts over it. Dracula seems to have telepathic control over his coffin, so rather than hiding it somewhere that's been found, he actually takes it and hides it in the swamp, in the bayou. And so he resurrects by having it come up to the surface of the bayou, and then his smoke comes out of that, and then there's a glorious shot that tracks with Lon Chaney as he just glides over the water towards Kay standing on the bank of the lake waiting for him. Ultimately, a thumbs up for Dracula's Daughter. Seek that out if you can. And Son of Dracula is a curiosity that really, to give Kay that character her due, should have been called Bride of Dracula. As we move on next, I believe next is going to be Son of Frankenstein and Ghost of Frankenstein. So stick with me. Really hope you're enjoying this because I'm having a blast.